For 30 winters I have kept the auld risqué, and in all that time I have never once taken a scale to sell. I say it plain because it is the only thing about me worth the saying. I am not a clever man. I never was. My father kept this fell before me, and his mother before him, and back past the counting of it. And when they laid him under his own cairn of fern and grey stone, I took up the crook and the fire-iron and the long knife he'd never once used on a living thing, and I climbed up here into the wind, and I stayed. There is nothing else to tell of my life. I have kept the slope where the dragons come to die. You will want to know how that is a thing a man can do, so I will tell you, though there is no trick in it. The risqué is a long bare shoulder of moor above the last of the birch. Nothing grows on it but heather and bilberry and the tough grey fern I have carried up in my arms more times than there are stars over it. From the bothy door I can see 3 valleys and the sea beyond the westmost, a hard bright line on a clear morning. There is no other house within a day's walk. That is the point of the place. The old ones want to be left alone at the end, and men, being what they are, cannot leave a dragon alone. So they come here where there is only me, and I am no trouble to anyone. They have come for longer than there have been keepers. When a dragon grows very old, older than the mountains it was hatched under, something in it turns toward the high cold ground the way a spent fire leans toward its last coal. It leaves whatever kin it has, whatever crag or hoard or high blue reach of sky, and it comes down out of the world and drags itself up my fell to lie in the wind and be done. I do not know why they choose the risqué above other high lonely places. My father said it was old, this ground, older than the word for it, and that the first dragons to die here made it holy by the dying, and the rest have come ever since because the dead call the dying home. I don't know about holy. I only know they come. I know the signs of it now the way another man knows weather. A shadow that circles too slow, a wing beat with a catch in it, a shape coming up the birch line not flying but crawling, hauling itself hand over hand with its great head low, because it has flown its last and it knows it. When I see that I put the kettle by and I go down to meet it. There is not much a man can do for a dying dragon. That is the first thing to understand and the hardest. You cannot save it. You cannot even lift its smallest claw. What you can do is small, and it is nearly all of it kindness, which costs nothing but is the rarest thing in the world. You can bring water. A dying dragon thirsts terribly at the end, and there is a spring below the bothy I have widened over the years into a pool a great head can drink from, and I carry it up in a leather bucket, trip after trip, until the thirst eases. You can bring warmth. The old ones go cold from the tail forward, and I have hauled peat and dry gorse and built a long low fire beside more dying dragons than I can name, not to warm the great furnace of them, which no fire of mine could touch, but so that the last thing they feel on their failing side is heat and not the wind. You can keep off the crows. You can keep off worse than crows, and I will come to that. You can talk, if it wants talk, though most don't. And when the breath finally goes out of it long and slow like a door closing in an empty house, you can close its eye if you can reach the eye, and if you can't you can lay your hand on whatever part of it you can reach and say the thing my father said, which is only rest now, you are done, no one will trouble your sleep, and then you can cover it. That last is the whole of the work, and it is the work no other man will do. You cover a dead dragon with fern and with stone, not to hide it, to honor it. You lay the gray fern over the eyes and the long jaw first, and then along the spine, and then you bring the stones, the flat moorstones, and you build them up over the body slow across the days and the weeks until there is a long low cairn where the dragon was, and the fern feeds the moss and the moss takes the stone. And in 10 years it is a green swell in the heather that you would walk over and never know, except that I know. I know everyone. There are 100 and more of them across the risqué, and I could walk you to each in the dark and tell you the shape of the thing beneath and the day it came and the way it went. That is my memory. That is all I have made in my life, a field of quiet. Now I will tell you about the reavers, because you cannot understand what happened this last winter without understanding them, and understanding them is the ugliest part of this, and I would leave it out if I could. A dead dragon is worth a fortune to men who will strip it. The scales, whole and shining, go to armorers and to lords who want their hall doors plated. The long teeth go to the knife men. The claws, the horn, the wing leather cured right, all of it sells. And above all of it sells the heartstone, the hard, bright clot that forms in the breast of a very old dragon, and that the alchemists pay for in weights of gold because they believe, wrongly, that it lengthens a man's life. A stripped dragon is a season's fortune. And the risque, to a certain kind of man, is not a holy ground and not a field of quiet. It is a larder. It is 100 fortunes lying under fern, waiting for anyone bold enough to climb past the mad old keeper and dig. They call themselves reavers or scalemen or, when they want to sound like tradesmen, the salvage. They came in my father's time and they came in his mother's and they come in mine, and I have driven them off the risque more times than I have fingers and toes to count them on. I am one old man. I have a crook and a fire iron and 2 rough dogs and a horn that carries down all 3 valleys, and I have the truth of the place, which is worth more than all of it, because a reaver in his heart knows he is doing a foul thing, and a foul thing done in daylight in front of a man who will not look away is a hard thing to do. I stand over the fresh cairns when they come. I put myself between the spade and the dead. I have been beaten for it twice and had my arm broke once, and my bothy fired the winter my father died. And still I stood, because a keeper who will not stand is not a keeper. He is only a man who lives on a hill near some dragons. They think me mad. Let them. A dead thing cannot pay me and cannot thank me and cannot know whether it was covered or stripped, and I keep it covered anyway. And to a reaver that is madness plain, because a reaver cannot imagine doing a thing for no coin and no notice. But my father taught me the creed of this ground before I could well walk, and it is only 5 words, and I have said them over every grave I ever raised. Do not profane the dead. That is the whole of my religion. I have no other. It has been enough. So 30 winters, 100 cairns, one old man who never took a scale. I tell you all of it so you will believe the next part, which I would not believe myself if I had not stood in the middle of it with the wind taking the fern out of my hands. It was late in the back end of the year, the light already low and gold by mid-afternoon, the first hard frosts silvering the fern of a morning. I was mending the pool wall when I felt the shadow. You feel them before you see them, the very great ones. A dragon of ordinary size throws a shadow you take for a cloud. But there is a kind of old one whose passing overhead you feel in your chest before your eye finds it. A pressure, a hush, the way the moor birds go silent all at once and the dogs press against your leg. I felt that, and I straightened up with my hand full of wet stone, and I looked to the birch line, and I saw her coming. I have used the word great too easily in this telling, and I am sorry for it because now I have no word left that is great enough. She was coming up out of the lower valley, not flying. She had done with flying, but hauling herself up the fell the way they all do at the end, low, slow, terrible in her patience. And she was the size of the fell itself. I do not say that as a countryman's boast. Her back, as she came, stood higher than the roof ridge of my bothy. Her head, low as she held it, was longer than my whole house. Her scales, where the failing light caught them, were the deep gray-green of the sea under cloud, each one broad as a cart door, and along her spine ran a ridge of black horn worn round and smooth with unimaginable age, and her wings were the worst and the most beautiful of it. They were folded down her sides, and they were thin. Thin as burnt paper, thin as a leaf held to the sun, so worn by the years that the light came through them, and showed the black branching veins like the shadow of a drowned forest. She had flown on those for longer than my whole line had kept this hill, and now she could not lift them, and she was crawling up my fell to die, and I stood in the pool mud with my mouth open like the fool the reavers take me for. I have met many dying dragons. I have never in my life been afraid of one, because there is nothing to fear in a thing that has laid its arms down and come to be done. But I will own that when she raised her head and found me with her eye, I felt my knees want to go, because the eye was the size of a mill wheel, and it was the deep pale gold of very old amber, and it was aware. Most of them at the end are half gone already, turned inward toward the dark. She was not. She was entirely there, and she looked at me, one old man in the mud, and I saw her take my measure, and I did the only thing I know how to do. I put down the stone. I wiped my hands on my coat slow so she could see they were empty, and I said, loud enough to carry over the wind, the thing I say to all of them. You're welcome here. There's water above, and I'll bring it to you. No one will trouble you. Come up when you're ready and take your time. There's no hurry on this hill. She looked at me a while longer. Then she lowered her head the last of the way to the fern, and she came on, and I turned and I went up ahead of her to make ready, and my hands were shaking, and I was not ashamed of it. It took her the rest of that day and most of the night to climb to the flat shoulder of the moor where the oldest cairns are, and where, I understood without knowing how I understood it, she meant to lie. I did not rush her. You never rush them. I went ahead and I built the fire, a great long fire this time, the biggest I ever raised, dragging peat until my back was a bar of iron, because a body that size would take a body of heat to answer it. I widened the fire down the whole length of where she would lie. I filled the pool and I filled it again. And through the short bright afternoon and the long cold night I went back and forth to her as she climbed, bringing the leather bucket, and she drank from my hand, not from my hand. Her tongue alone would have taken my arm, but she let me pour it into the corner of her jaw where she could work it back. And the trust of that, the trust of a thing that could have ended me by breathing wrong, letting a stranger's hand near the corner of its mouth, I have kept that. I will keep it till my own cairn. By the gray of the next dawn she was up. She lay along the crown of the risque with the sea a hard, bright line beyond her, and the sun coming up red behind the eastern valley and putting light through those ruined wings, so that for a moment she lay under two great fans of stained glass shadow, black-veined, glowing. And she let her breath out long, and I knew that sound. I have heard it 100 times. It is the sound of a thing that has arrived where it was going. There, I said, I had brought the last bucket and I set it by her jaw. There, you made it, rest now. And she spoke to me. I did not know they could. In 30 winters not one had, and I had come to think it a story, that dragons had words, the way you half believe and half doubt a thing your father told you when you were small. But she turned that great amber eye on me, and out of her came a voice like the sea working in a cave far under the ground, slow. And I felt it in the stone under my feet more than I heard it in my ears, and what she said was, "Why?" Just that, not thank you, not who are you. Only why, the way you'd ask it of a thing that made no sense to you, and I understood that in all her endless years she had never once seen the thing I was doing, and it did not fit anywhere in her knowledge of the world. I did not have a clever answer. I never have. I stood there with the empty bucket and I said the truth, which was all I had. Because you're dying, I said, and no one should die cold and thirsty and alone with folk waiting to cut them up before they're well gone. That's all. My father kept this hill and his before, and we don't profane the dead. It's the only thing I know how to do, so I do it. She was quiet a long while. The sun climbed. The fire cracked and settled. There are men, she said at last in that underground voice, who wait to cut us up. It was not a question. There was something under it, old and cold, and I understood I had touched a wound far older than me. There are, I said. I keep them off. I've kept them off this hill 30 winters. I'll keep them off you. You have my word on it for what an old man's word is worth. And she looked at me, and something moved in the great amber eye, and she said a thing I did not understand until later, until everything, and then I understood it all at once and had to sit down in the fern. I have flown over the whole turning world, she said, for 400 years and more, and I have seen every cruelty a maker can be put to. I did not know there was one who covered us, a long breath. I did not know there was a hill. Then she laid her head down in the fern and she said, very low, "Stay by me, keeper. I find I do not want the quiet just yet." So I stayed. I stayed 9 days. I will not tell all of the 9 days, because much of it was only the work, the water, the fire, the long sitting, and because some of it was hers and not mine to give away. But I will tell you what I can, because I think you should know what she was, so that you understand what came for her. Her name, she told me on the third day, was Maylora. She had been in the reckoning of her kind a queen. No, that is my small word for it, and it is wrong. She had been the root of a house, the oldest living mother of a line of dragons so vast and so high in the world that they had a name that men whisper and do not say twice, the Orving, the dragon empire of the north reaches, whose least outrider could darken a town. She was their eldest. She was the memory of them, 400 years of it and more, every hatching and every grief and every war of their kind held in the great slow furnace of her mind. When she was young, the mountains I keep this fell above had been a single burning plain. She remembered it. She had seen it cool. And she had left them, her whole enormous kin, and come away south and down alone to die, because she told me this on the 6th day, when the cold had reached her forelegs and I was keeping the fire high, because the Orvin had lost too many of their old ones to the reavers, to men, and it had made them hard and wrathful, and they had begun to guard their dying with fire. To burn any place a valued elder went to its end, so that no human hand could ever profane it. And she had not wanted that. She had not wanted her death to be a killing. She had seen 400 years of her children's grief curdling into vengeance, and she had thought, in her great slow way, that if she slipped off alone and quiet and died in some forgotten high place where no one would ever find her, then at least her death would spill no more blood, and the young ones would grieve clean. I meant to be lost, she said. I meant no one to find me at all, and instead I am found by the one man in the turning world who kneels to cover the dead. Her breath rattled. The world is stranger than even I knew it, and I knew all of it. They'll come looking for you, I said. It had been sitting cold in me for days. Your kin, won't they? They may, she said. I hope they do not, but they may. I flew far and hid my trail, but the Orvin do not lose their mothers easily. The amber eye found me. If they come, keeper, they will come in grief, and grief in my kind wears the face of rage. They will see this hill of stripped-looking mounds and think the worst of it and of you, and they may not stay to learn better. You should go down. When you feel the sky change, you should go down off the risque and leave me, and let them find me and grieve and go. No, I said. I did not even think about it. It came out of me the way because your dying had come out of me, from the same old plain place. I don't leave them, I said. I've never once left one of you before it was covered, and I'm not starting with the greatest of you. If they come, and they'll find me right here doing what I do. And if they've a mind to burn the hill, they can burn me on it, but I'll not run off and leave you to be found alone by folk in a rage. That's the whole of what I've got, Maylora, standing by the dead. Take it or don't, but I'll not put it down for fear. She looked at me for a very long time, and then she made a sound I had never heard from a dragon, low and broken and warm. And I understood after a moment that the greatest living thing in the world was, in her way, laughing, and that under the laugh she was weeping, and that both were for me. My children guard their dead with fire, she said softly. And here is a bald old ape who guards his with fern and stands his ground for a corpse he owes nothing. I have outlived my own understanding of things. The wing nearest me stirred, the ruined paper of it and the very edge of it, the leading claw, came down slow and rested against my back, light as a settling bird, the only embrace such a thing could give a man my size. Thank you, she said. There, I have said it now. I did not say it at first because I did not believe in it. Thank you, keeper. For the water, for the fire, for the fern you have not yet laid, but that I know you will lay. You have made my death a small good thing, and I did not think a death of mine could be that. Rest well when your own time comes. I will tell the ones who wait beyond that you are to be let past easy. And that was the 6th day. On the 7th the reavers came. They had heard, of course. A dragon that size does not cross 3 valleys without being seen, and word of a great one gone up the risque to die would run through every low tavern in the reaches like fire through gorse, because a great one meant the fortune of fortunes, meant heartstone the size of a man's head, meant every scaleman and bone cutter and cut-throat within a week's ride throwing his tools in a sack and coming for the richest kill the hill had ever held. I had known they would come. I had not known they would come near 40 strong. They came up the birch line in the bright cold morning, a whole ragged army of them, with spades and axes and the long flensing knives and the winches and the block-end tackle they used to peel a wing and mules to carry it out, and among them 3 or 4 hard men with crossbows, because they had come expecting the mad old keeper and they had come meaning to put him down and dig in peace this time. I saw them from the pool. I set the bucket down. I whistled the dogs to me, and I took up the crook, and I walked down alone to the edge of the flat where the fresh place was, where Maylora lay breathing her slow last breaths with the fern I had already begun to lay across her failing hindquarters, and I put myself between her and the 40 of them, one old man on the open moor in the bright, unforgiving light of a clear winter noon. Their leader I knew of old, a big, soft-spoken man named Halkett who had been coming to strip this hill for 20 years and had broken my arm the once. He came up ahead of the rest, and he stopped a spear's length off, and he looked past me at her, at the sheer mountain of her, and I watched the greed come up in his face like water in a well. "Merrick," he said, almost kind. "Merrick, you old fool, look at it, look at the size of it. There's not a man here won't be a lord off that, you included. Step aside. There's no cause to break your other arm. Step aside and I'll cut you a full share and you can keep your hill and your fern and your ghost stories and be rich the rest of your days. It's dead or as good as. It can't know. Nothing can know. Step aside." "It's not dead," I said, "and it's not in it. Her name is Maylora, and she's the mother of the Orving, and she is going to die on this hill in peace if I have to stand here till you shoot me down, Halkett, which I see you've come prepared to do. So do it or go home, but you're not touching her while there's breath in me, and that's the last word you'll get out of me, so save yours." He sighed. He'd expected it. He always did. He lifted his hand to bring up the crossbowman, and I stood square and I did not close my eyes, because a keeper who will not stand is not a keeper, and I meant to be a keeper to the last breath the way she meant to be Maylora to hers, and if that is madness then I have been glad to be mad. And behind me, Maylora lifted her head. She had not moved in 2 days but to breathe. Now slow, terrible, the great gray-green head came up off the fern, and up on the long neck and turned, and the vast amber eye opened on the 40 men in the noon light, and she drew one breath, the longest and last great breath of 400 years, and she did not burn them. She could have. I know she could have. Even dying, the heat came off her like an open forge, and I felt it on my back. She did not. She only spoke in that voice out of the ground, and she said one word, and the word was enough. And it went through the moor like the sea. The stones shook, the mules screamed and bolted, and the 40 hard men who had come to peel her, the crossbowmen with their fingers on the loose, every one of them, stood one heartbeat frozen in the raw amber blaze of the eye of the mother of the Orving, and then they ran. They dropped the spades and the winches and the long knives in the fern, and they ran back down the birch line, falling over one another, Halkett among them. 20 years of greed emptied out of him in one breath, and they did not stop, and they did not look back. And by the time the sun was off the noon, they were gone off the Risquet and out of the 3 valleys, and I never in my life saw one of them on the hill again. Maylora's head came down slow. The breath had cost her. I ran to her, useless, my hands out, and I got to the corner of her jaw, and I put both my hands on the great warm scale of it, and I said, "Why did you spend it? Why did you spend it on them? You'd none to spare." "So that you would live," she said, and it was barely a voice now, barely the sea in the deepest cave. "You would not step aside, I know your kind now. You would have stood there and let them shoot you down over my dead body for nothing, for the creed of a hill. I have watched men do every cruel thing under the sun, keeper. I wished, before I went, to have spent my last breath keeping one of you alive. Let an old queen have her one clean thing. Now, a long, long settling." The eye turned to me, gentling. "Now lay the fern, I am cold to the shoulder. It is time. Lay the fern and say your 5 words and stay by me while I go. I do not want the quiet yet, but it is coming and I am not afraid of it and you must not be either. So I laid the fern. I laid it over the long jaw and the great worn horns, and along the spine, all that I could reach, working up onto the low swell of her side with armfuls of the gray moor fern I had carried up 1,000 times for lesser ones, and never for 1/100th her worth. I laid it over the ruined wings, gentle, the way you draw a sheet over a sleeping child, over the black-veined paper of them that had held the whole sky up for 400 years. And I came back to her head and I put my hand on the broad scale below the amber eye, and the eye was already going soft and far, and I said my father's 5 words, the only prayer I have. Do not profane the dead. And then the other thing, the thing you say when you can reach the eye. Rest now, you're done. No one will trouble your sleep. Not while I keep this hill. Not after. Rest now, Maylora. You made it. You made it all the way here, and you were covered by a hand that loved you a little at the end, and that's more than most of us get, queen or keeper. Rest. The great breath went out of her long and slow, like a door closing in an empty house. And the wind kept on over the risqué, and the fern I had laid stirred on the still gray-green mountain of her, and I sat down beside the head of the mother of the Orvin in the bright cold falling light, and I wept the way I have wept over none of the 100 before her, because I had known her 9 days, and she had asked me why, and I had got to tell her, and she had died believing there was a hill. I did not hear the sky change. I was too far down in the grief. The first I knew of it was the dogs pressing hard against me and shaking, and then the light going not to cloud but to shadow, a shadow with no edge, and then the hush, the great pressure in the chest, only now it was not one of them. It was all of them. I lifted my head, and the Orvin had come. The sky over the risqué was full of dragons. I cannot tell you how many. The word many is a child's word for it. They came down out of the north on the failing day in their scores, wing over wing, from the young quick ones bright as new copper to the huge slate-gray elders whose passing put whole valleys in the dark. An empire of them, a nation, and they came down around the crown of the hill and they landed. And the landing of them shook the cairns of 100 years, and they lowered their heads, and every eye of that whole descended empire fixed on the one thing on the hill, which was the great still shape of their lost mother lying under a poor old man's fern, with the poor old man sitting beside her head, with his hands red from the carrying of the stone. And I understood, with a cold that went deeper than any fear I have known, what Maylora had told me on the 6th day. They will come in grief, and grief in my kind wears the face of rage. They will see this hill of strip-looking mounds, and think the worst of it and of you. They saw the mounds, 100 of them across the risqué, the low green swells and the raw new stone. To an Orvin, to a people who burned their own dead to keep human hands off them, this hill could be only one thing, a robber's field, a larder. A place where men had been dragging dragons to strip for 100 years, and here at last was the man who did it, sitting red-handed over the freshest and greatest kill of all, their mother, half buried already, with the reaver's own dropped tools and winches lying in the fern all around him where Halkett's men had thrown them down and fled. I saw it the way they saw it. I saw the whole terrible mistake of it laid out in one glance, and I saw the fire begin to come up in 100 throats, the deep red light kindling behind 100 sets of teeth, and one of them came forward from the rest, the greatest of the young ones, slate and silver, with Maylora's own pale gold eyes, and I knew without being told this was the heir, the new root of the house, the daughter or granddaughter come to be mother now in her turn. And she was looking at me with those inherited eyes full of 400 years of stolen and burned and profaned dead, and her throat was glowing, and she opened her jaws. I did not run. I want that written down plainly, not because there was any bravery in it. There was no time for bravery. And anyway, I am not a brave man, I am only a keeper, but because it is the truest thing I did in the whole of it, and I would not have it thought I did otherwise. I did not run, and I did not beg, and I did not try to explain, because there was no explaining 100 years of fern to a throat full of fire in the half-second I had. I only did the one thing I know how to do. I got up off the ground, old and slow, and I turned my back on the whole descended empire of the Orvin and their kindling fire, and I put my body between them and the head of their dead mother, and I laid my two red hands back on the fern I had covered her with, and I stood there over her, keeping her, the way I have kept every one of them, and I waited to be burned covering the dead, which is not the worst way for a keeper to go, and I found, standing there, that I was not afraid. And I understood that she had given me that too, in the end. The fire did not come. I heard instead a sound. A great slow sound from the young slaten silver air, low, questioning. Exactly, exactly. The sound her mother had made on the first bright morning. The very same word in the very same voice out of the deep ground, and it was. Why? I did not turn around. I kept my hands on the fern. But I answered it the way I had answered her mother, loud enough to carry over the wind and the terrible waiting hush of 100 dragons. Because she was dying, I said, and no one should die cold and alone with folk waiting to cut them up. I gave her water. I kept her warm. I kept the reavers off. Those are their tools in the fern, not mine. They ran when she spoke. And when she was gone, I covered her, the way I've covered every one of your kind that ever climbed my hill to die, 100 of them and more, and every one under those green mounds you take for a robber's work. Every one is covered, not stripped, covered and kept and grieved by the only hands that would do it. I never took a scale. In 30 winters I never took one scale to sell from her or from any of them. Look, look if you don't believe an old man. Dig one up. You'll find your grandmother's grandmother under the fern with her wings folded right and her eye closed and her heartstone still in her breast where it belongs. That's this hill. That's all this hill has ever been. It's not a larder. It's a grave. I'm not a reaver. I'm the man who keeps them from the reavers, and I've kept them 30 winters for nothing and no thanks, and I'd have kept your mother for 30 more if she'd asked it. And if you burn me now, you'll burn me doing the one thing I ever did right. So do it or don't, but don't you dare call this hill a foul place. It's the only clean thing I ever made. And then, because there was nothing left in me but the truth and the grief, I said the last of it quiet, more to Maelora under my hands than to the empire at my back. She asked me why too, I said. 9 days ago. She'd flown over the whole turning world for 400 years, and she'd never once seen a man cover a dragon, and it broke something in her that there was a hill where it happened. So don't you tell me your dead are only ever burned or stripped. There's one hill in the world where they're kept, and I'm standing on it, and I'll go on standing on it till you put me under my own fern beside them. The silence after that was the longest of my life. Then behind me I heard the young air move, not the rush and roar of fire, but a slow, heavy settling, the great weight of her coming down, and I turned at last because I could not help it, and I saw that the slate-and silver dragon, the new mother of the Orvin, had lowered herself to the fern, and had reached out her vast head slow, the way I had reached the water to her mother's jaw, and she did not burn me and she did not touch me. She laid the side of her great head down against the covered flank of Maelora, against my fern, against the low gray-green mountain of her mother, and she closed her pale gold eyes, and out of her came that broken warm sound, the same one, the laugh that was a weeping. Only there was no laugh in this one, only the grief, 400 years of it, and behind her the whole descended empire of the Orvin lowered their 100 heads, not to me. I want that clear. They did not kneel to me. I would not have it, and it was not that. They lowered their heads to her, to their mother, to the dead, the way I lower mine. And for the first time in the history of their proud and burning kind, the Orvin grieved one of their own, not in fire but in silence, in the old way, in the way of the hill, standing bareheaded in the wind over a grave. We stood so a long time, the empire and the old man, over Maelora, while the sun went down red behind the eastern valley, and the light came one last time through what could be seen of her ruined wings under the fern. They did not take her away that night, nor strip her, nor burn her. In the morning the young heir came to me where I sat by the cold fire, and she spoke, in her mother's voice grown into her own, and she said, "We will carry her home, to the north, to lie among the roots of the mountains where she was hatched in the old high place, and we will cover her there with stone, as you covered her. We did not know how it was done. You will teach us how it is done." So I taught the Orvan how to bury their dead. I stood on the crown of the Risqué, and I showed the greatest empire of dragons in the turning world how you lay the fern over the eyes first, and then along the spine, and then how you bring the stone, and how you leave a heartstone in the breast where it belongs and do not sell it though it would buy a kingdom, because the dead are not a market, they are the dead. And they listened, those vast proud creatures who could have unmade my whole country in a morning. They bent their 100 heads and listened to a bald old ape teach them the only thing he ever knew. And when they lifted Maelora, it took a score of them, and even a score of the Orvan strained under her. When they lifted her to carry her north, they lifted her still wrapped in my fern, my poor grey moor fern, and they would not have it taken off. And they carried the mother of their empire home to the roots of the mountains, under the covering laid by the hands of a man who owned nothing, and kept a hill. The heir was the last to go. She stood over me in the bright cold second morning, and she said, "There is no gift the Orvan can give that is not an insult to what you have done, keeper. You did it for nothing. To pay you would be to call it a service, and it was not a service, it was a grace, and a grace cannot be bought, or it was never a grace at all." My mother understood this. She spent her last breath on it. "So I will not offer you gold or scales or the plating of your hall doors or any of the things men strip us for. I will offer you the only thing that is not an insult." And she lowered her great head to my level, and the pale gold eyes, so like her mother's, held mine. "I will offer you help. You are old, keeper. Your hands shake. You carry the stone up alone, and there is no keeper after you, and when you are gone this hill will be a robber's field within a season, and every dragon under this fern will be dug up and sold, and the one clean thing in the world will end. That we cannot allow. That my mother would not allow. So, one of ours will stay. Not to rule your hill, it is yours, and the creed of it is yours. And we will not touch it, but to learn it, to carry the stone when your back fails, to keep the Risqué when you are under your own fern beside the mother you covered, so that the hill goes on, so that there is always in the turning world one place where the dead are kept. A long breath, the sea and the deep cave. Will you have him, keeper, an apprentice? He is young and quick, and he thinks too well of himself, but he has his great-grandmother's heart, and I think you will make something of him. Will you teach him the fern?" And a young dragon came forward out of the last of the flight, copper bright and awkward and no bigger than my bothy, with the light coming clean through his good new wings. And he looked at me sidelong the way the young look at the old, half doubt and half hope. And I looked at him, and I thought of my father and his mother, and the long line of keepers back past the counting of it, that I had thought would end with me, and the last cairn I raised for myself alone. I said, my voice was not steady, I did not try to make it steady. I'll have him. Come here then, lad. There's water to carry, and it won't carry itself, and I'll not have you thinking there's any glory in it, for there's none, there's only the doing of it. Come here and I'll show you where the spring is. That's the first thing. Everything starts with the water. That was this last winter. He is still here, the young one. He is called Corin, which the Orvan tell me was a name in Maelora's own hatching, given to him now for the keeping of her hill. And he is quick, and he thinks too well of himself, just as the heir said. And he carries the stone up the fell now on his good copper, wings 4 at a time, where I carried it 1 at a time on my back for 30 years. And he grumbles at the cold, and he sulks when I correct his laying of the fern. And I love him the way you love the thing that will outlast you, which is the truest way there is. The reavers have not come back. Word went through the low taverns of the reaches, they tell me, that the Orvan themselves keep the Risqué now, and I suppose that is true enough, though it is really only me and a sulking copper youngster and the wind. No spade has broken this ground since Halkett dropped his and ran. The 100 cairns lie quiet. And when an old dragon comes down out of the world now, dragging itself up the birch line to be done, It is not only an old man who goes down to meet it with an empty bucket and open hands. It is a keeper and his apprentice, and behind them, though they never land and never intrude, high up and slow, the watch of an empire that learned at last that there was a hill. I am very old now. My own cairn will not be long in the raising, and Corin knows the shape of it already, up on the crown beside the great green mountain where I laid the fern over Melora's eyes, and he has promised me the 5 words, and I believe him. I do not fear it. She told me not to, and she was 400 years wise, and she spent her last breath keeping me alive to hear it, and I have never in my life had better advice than the word of a dying queen. I never took a scale to sell. In 30 winters and more I never took one. That is the only thing about me worth the saying, and I have said it now, and I am content. Rest well, all of you, under the fern and the stone. No one will trouble your sleep, not while there is a hill, and there will always now be a hill.